Hello, and welcome to the Cosmos Show, the place to be if you're curious about the universe. I'm your host, Dr. Sam, the founder and executive director of Wyoming Stargazing. Here, you can pick the brain of astrophysicists, get advice from a space doctor, learn what astronomers have to say about life, and find out what's going on above your head, all in the same place. Please join us every other Tuesday on Twitch and on Zoom. You can chat your questions on Twitch. You can also call us and speak with us directly, ask questions to our co-stars and special guests. And the number should be viewable on your screen to do that. And the participant ID you'll need to log into Zoom to ask your question should be there as well. So we'd love to hear from you. Definitely give us a ring this evening. Tonight, we have got Dr. Nicole Cabrera Salazar, the founder and CEO of Movement Consulting. And she is here to tell us all about how to build radically nourishing scientific places. So we are very excited to have her later on this evening. But before we do that, let's introduce our co-stars. First, we have medical doctor and founder of Orbital Biodesign. It's Dr. Danny Carroll.
Hi, everybody.
Hey, Danny, thanks for being here. And this evening, we have three new co-stars joining us. First, journalist and founder of the Space Tourism Guide, as well as a recent special guest on the Cosmos Show. It's Valerie Stymek.
Hi, everyone. Glad to be here.
Glad to have you, Valerie. Next, one of our very own stargazing leaders at Wyoming Stargazing, and soon to be a PhD student in astrophysics, it's Emily Frank.
Hello.
Thanks for being here, Frank. And last, but certainly not least, educational consultant and astronomy enthusiast, it's Dr. Michelle Valdez.
Hello.
Thanks for being with us. Welcome, everybody. Thanks so much for being here. I just want to take a moment to welcome our three new co-stars and just give them a moment each to tell us where they're calling in from and one fun thing you plan to do on the winter solstice, which happens to be this evening. Valerie, why don't you kick us off, and then we can go to Frank and then Dr. Valdez.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much. So I'm dialing in from Cleveland, Ohio, which has been on a streak of clear days, very uncommon. Cleveland and most of Ohio is pretty cloudy, as we learned after we moved here. And looking back, I'm celebrating the winter solstice by looking at my photos from last solstice in December, when it was the Great Conjunction, and we saw Jupiter and Saturn so beautifully close together. I was sitting on the coast, the California coast, watching them as the sun went down. It was a fantastic memory.
That's awesome. I remember that as well. I was in Jackson for that.
I am celebrating the solstice by shooting some texts off to my aunt and uncle whose birthdays are today. And I will be eating some woman bars with my parents. Oh, nice. And I'm coming in from Pennsylvania, from Lancaster County.
Excellent. And Dr. Valdez?
I'm celebrating, it's like a short night, right? Short day, the shortest day. And so I gotta just have a little time with my dogs for a little bit, like you were doing. But and I had a lot of stuff going on today, so I know it's a short day, but just kind of wondering about that sometimes.
Awesome. And where are you calling in from, Dr. Valdez?
Jackson. I live here in Jackson. My house is right down the road from where you are.
Awesome. Yeah, from the Wyoming Stargazing office.
Yeah.
I'm actually not there. I'm actually in California right now. But
are you back there? Oh wow.
I'm in Half Moon Bay. I should have said that as well.
Nice.
I've been watching Venus and Jupiter and Saturn set over the Pacific Ocean over the past couple months. It's pretty
gosh,
sweet.
I would just love to have that, but we're here. Yeah. It's like so hard. Like right now, and this is my bedroom, fireplace. That's Snow King, so you know that.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, that's where I am at right now.
And I hear you guys are finally getting some snow in Jackson now.
Oh yeah. Oh, you haven't been here for a while. Oh yeah. Got
Yeah.
some snow.
I'll be back in town next week. I'm excited to be back.
Okay, great. Like
I have an
America.
important question.
Yeah.
Samuel, have you seen the comet, the Christmas comet?
No, there must be too much haze like right on the horizon. I know exactly where it should be, but I have not
Where
been
is
able
the
to see
Christmas
it.
comet?
Yeah, it's
Valerie?
Comet Leonard. Right now, it's pretty close to the horizon now.
And it's kind of following Venus. It's very close to Venus, right?
Yeah.
The general part of the sky as the sun goes down.
Yeah. But yeah, hopefully, yeah.
Wish we can talk about that.
Yeah. And Danny,
Comets
what are
I
you
love
up to
comets.
for the solstice?
Details.
Any solstice plans, Danny? Oh, you're muted. We can't hear you.
Sorry about that. I'm here joining you guys.
Oh, nice.
But I'm calling in from Boulder, Colorado, which has gotten a shamefully low amount of snow so far this year. It's kind of crazy. I think this is like in the 99th percentile of years, apparently, where we just have gotten next to no snow.
Oh, wow.
A little bit eerie, actually. I hope we get dumped on in January.
Well, I think it's coming. I think according to the forecasts, tonight is the last clear night we're going to have in Jackson in 2021. The next week or so is going to be pretty snowy, so it's coming.
Yeah, pretty snowy. It's coming.
All the skiers are gonna love it.
They're psyched. I was hoping it would just snow during the day and then we'd have nice clear nights all week long. Doesn't look like that's going to happen. It looks like.
But when Samuel left, it was dry as a bone.
Yeah, it totally was.
I mean, really, I didn't even know when I went and got my booster, I was like, what day is it? I don't even, what month is it? But it was dry.
Yeah. The end of November, first week of December was bone dry.
Wow. It was
Very
70
different.
degrees in Boulder today.
Wow, that's crazy.
Like,
Not okay.
I know, it's weird.
Okay. Well, anyways, thank you all for being here. Co-stars new and old. Appreciate your time. And we've already mentioned the solstice a few times, but we can't actually do the show tonight without telling you what it is. There are a lot of misconceptions about the seasons and about the solstice season equinoxes. So I want to take just a few minutes and just talk with you and show you a couple diagrams about that. So here's a diagram. It shows the Earth's orbital path around the sun. And the first thing I want to point out is that the tilt of the Earth is always pointing in the same direction as it orbits around the sun. So that tilt, a 23.5-degree tilt, is always pointing out to a part in space for us northerners in the northern hemisphere towards the star Polaris, the pole star, which makes navigation really convenient because that star never moves because the rotational axis of the Earth is pointed right to it. So as the Earth turns around that imaginary stick coming out of the top of it and the bottom of it, everything seems to move through the sky, the sun, the moon, all the stars, except for Polaris. But notice that as the Earth is moving around the sun, that tilt never changes with respect to the star Polaris. It's always pointing right towards it. But also notice that that relative tilt does change relative to the sun. And it's that relative change in position of the tilt with respect to the sun that gives rise to the seasons. So as you can see, where it says the summer solstice, the northern hemisphere of the Earth is pointed in towards the sun. And on the winter solstice today, the northern hemisphere of the sun is pointed away from the sun. And then in the spring and the summer, the northern hemisphere of Earth is not pointed away or towards the sun, but alongside it. And it's that relative tilt that gives rise to the seasons. And so for tonight or today, we've got the greatest number of nighttime hours and the shortest number of daytime hours. And it's just the opposite 6 months from now on the summer solstice, when we have the longest number of daytime hours and the shortest nighttime hours. And it's reversed for the Southern Hemisphere. So right now we're beginning winter, first day of winter. The Southern Hemisphere is celebrating their first day of summer. And then vice versa, when we get into summer, they're into winter. Now, I think probably one of the biggest misconceptions about the seasons is that it has to do with the distance between the Earth and the sun. And it doesn't. It doesn't have anything to do with the distance changing. In fact, the Earth is closest to the sun during our winter in the Northern Hemisphere. We're getting closer to the sun right now, and in 2 weeks, we will reach our closest proximity to the sun in the middle of winter. And then in the summertime, the Northern Hemisphere, that's actually when we're farthest away from the sun. So you can see that it's got nothing to do with distance. What it does have to do with is the consequences of the tilt, like Dr. Valdez was just saying. So here's a little jingle. Here's a little jingle that the folks who created the kinesthetic astronomy lessons put together, which I absolutely love. I can't remember their names right now, shamefully. We'll give you credit, but the kinesthetic astronomy lessons, the sky time lesson, the reasons for the seasons is the length of days and angle of rays, but nothing to do with how far away. So the deal is, when the tilt of the Earth is in towards the sun for the Northern Hemisphere, the sun appears higher in the sky. So it spends more hours above the horizon and thus has more hours to heat up the Earth on that part of the Earth. So Northern Hemisphere, more daylight hours in the summertime, more radiation. So we have higher temperatures. Just the opposite in the wintertime. Shorter daylight hours, the sun spends a smaller amount of time in the sky. So a shorter period of time to heat the Earth. So it's colder temperatures. So that's the length of days part of that jingle. Then we've got the angle of rays. Okay, so when the sun spends more time in the sky in the summertime, it also climbs to a higher point in the sky. In the northern latitudes like Jackson, you can really see this. In the summertime, the sun makes a really high arc through the sky, but in the wintertime, it stays much, much closer to the horizon. So that changes the angle of the sun's rays that we get in Jackson and everywhere else on the Earth, with the exception of right on the equator. But anyways, places like Jackson, the sun's rays are more concentrated during the summertime when the sun is higher up in the sky. So we've got more solar radiation concentrated into one point. So it's warmer. And in the wintertime, just the opposite is true. The sun is much lower in the sky, so the angle is greater, and thus the same amount of solar radiation is spread out over a longer area, larger area. And so colder temperatures. So that's it, the length of days and the angle of rays, but nothing to do with how far away. Those are the reasons for the seasons. Thank you, Valerie. Dr. Valdez, it looked like you were just like chomping at the bit to add something there. Do you have something you want to add to that?
I was just like, I remember teaching that. You're right, spot on.
Yeah, thanks.
I do want to say, I love that first graphic you showed had the months instead of the seasons, because that's something I've been working hard with in my own writing, is to sort of de-northernize the way we talk about the solstices and the equinoxes, since there are a whole load of people for whom it is not the winter solstice.
That's
maybe
right.
Not listening at this point live because it's the middle of the night for many of them. But yeah, I love this graphic having the months, because that's something that's really important for representing the way the whole world is experiencing this change.
Totally. Yeah, and this graphic comes from the Time and Date website. They are an awesome resource for all things astronomy. We use their website a ton just to know the actual rising times and setting times of the sun and the moon, but they've got amazing information about seasonal changes and lots of other things to do with the night sky and meteorology. So you can check them out. I think their web link is down the bottom right-hand corner of that graphic.
Can I just say one thing?
Yeah, please.
We're going to move on. But Valerie, I was watching your videos, at the Cosmos show, and I just love what you said about when that totality came. You're talking about that feeling, and I just have to just tell you right now, because maybe I don't ever talk again, but that was amazing when I walked to the top of this mountain here. And like you said, people all have emotions or whatever. Everyone that I was with, we just were crying for no reason. And I don't know, I was just going, let's go up and have a good time. You know, my dog, let's go. And that was like, you were right about those feelings that come from people that no one understands. And when that sphere comes over that sphere, when you were saying, so I just wanted you to know, I watched that and I was like, that's what happened to me.
Yeah, thanks.
Anyway, I'm going to be your follower, but I just saw that and today I go, I would love that girl, because I was just up there going, this is what happened to me in my experience. So
yeah, when I figure out how to describe it, I'm going to be very, very well-written person, because it's almost an indescribable feeling, even for someone whose job it is to figure out how to describe that.
Right. And I'm going up just like going, I'm going to go see this beautiful thing. It's going to be great. And then I look around and everyone around me and people with me were it was so, I can't even tell you yeah. And then my dad passed away a few years ago. And then every feeling that came out of me, I thought was that, but no, it was, can't even believe I saw that in my life. I'm thankful in my life I saw that. Beautiful. But when you were describing it, I was like, that's what we all felt. Something that you can't describe. And it was real. Amazing.
Was it a sense of awe?
It was a sense of, to me, and then Sammy was there.
Yeah.
It was this sense of like, something came, like it just happened. And when those spheres got together and that beautiful diamond came out, everything kind of went quiet, dark, and just, but not too dark because I was up on the top. And I thought my dog would react, but into my heart, it just was an explosion in my heart, in my mind. It was somewhere different, and crying. Why was I crying? And
Danny, I think
you were crying, right? Did you just cry?
Yeah, I did. I mean, as did like the 300 people that were around me as well. We were all crying.
Yeah,
everyone I know who went there said they cried. Oh, sorry, what was that?
No, but it was so beautiful. It was like such an emotional thing in my own being and around me and people. And they were just like, everyone was crying around me. And I didn't think I was going to go up there and hike way to the top and go, I'm going to cry tonight. Nope, cry today.
With a bunch of other people.
Yeah, it was just, I don't understand, but it was something cosmic. I don't know what it was.
Yeah. I think it really is
that
it's the true definition of awe. It really is. I think we use, it's funny. I love the UK. And if you go to the UK, they kind of make fun of Americans that we use the word awesome so much, which is a derivative of the word of awe.
Yeah.
And so I think like we've sort of watered down what awe really is, but awe is it's not something you can describe. Like that's sort of the definition. It's like you're speechless from the experience you're having. And that's exactly what it feels like. So I don't know that we had any criers. I was at a big event too. And we had lots of like whooping and like caveman, like caveman reactions, like very primeval human vocalizations and emotions, like way deeper than anything that our current 21st century brains are really in control of. It was very cool.
Whoa. I don't think I had heard that before.
Well, when I was just watching back some shows that they had. I saw Valerie on and I was like, oh my gosh, I totally connect with her. I felt that whole thing. So anyway, Valerie, I felt that when you said that.
Thanks for watching.
Oh, and in 3 more years, we get another one, 2024, Texas to Maine.
Well, and then Valerie's going somewhere else. I remember Valerie's going to the East Coast or somewhere. You going somewhere?
We get an annular eclipse in 23.
So
we get right across, we get a beautiful annular. It's going to come over Crater Lake. That's where I hope to be.
Cool.
Seems just like a perfect place to be. And so we get that in April 23, and then in 24 we have totality, and it's a good couple of years. And then just because we're on it, in 26 is the best, the longest duration of totality in our entire century, and you have to be in Egypt. So Plan
Ooh,
ahead.
that sounds like a
Oh,
good time to go
wow.
to Egypt.
I'm gonna book a flight to Cairo.
Better get my kennel.
Did
Yep.
you say you already booked one?
No, I'm saying it's time.
You have time
It's
to. I actually have a meeting with someone in a couple weeks about setting up a trip to Cairo for that eclipse. So I'll
Wow.
keep y'all informed about that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
All right,
can I
gotta.
go too?
You just booked your
Yes,
trip. You're done.
all the
That's it.
Cosmo Show folks are
Just-
invited.
Just put
All
me
right.
in your backpack. I'm in Jackson.
You can
Down the
lead some of
road.
the programs. We gotta move on here.
I know.
We're having too much
Sorry.
fun. All right, so
It was
the next segment we're going to do here is Astro Advice, life advice from astronomers. Tonight we have a quotation from Dr. Heidi Hammel, and what Dr. Hammel says is that we need people pushing the boundaries. Exploration is what we as humans do. And I love that for a couple reasons. I think it is incredibly pertinent for what we're going to be talking about tonight with our special guest, but also because we're going to launch the James Webb Space Telescope in 3 days on Christmas Eve, if all goes well. 30 years of design and planning and building
Said that.
are all going to come to
money.
fruition, and lots of money and testing. Tests that were not done on the Hubble Space Telescope were done on James Webb, and that's going to get launched out into space on the 24th. So I mean, talk about pushing the boundaries and exploration. But anyways, I'm curious to hear what everybody else thinks about that quotation. And remember, for those of you watching, you can call in and chat your comments as well, or give us a ring and talk to us live. But co-stars, any thoughts about that one?
I can start on this one. So this concept of exploration is very near and dear to my heart, not just in on the medical front, but I think the pilot in me just has this intrinsic love of this concept. And for me, space is the ultimate opportunity to explore. It's really like the ultimate adventure in many, many senses, and it's not just exploring for the sake of exploring, but it's exploring to push humanity forward. So there's just like a really awesome meaning behind it. And this is an amazing time to be involved in this field too. This is truly, we're like entering the next era of human space exploration that's happening actively right now. So pretty cool stuff. But I love this quote. It's great.
Yeah, I mean, what got me into astronomy was like the feeling or the pursuit of discovery, right? Just being part of something that where you can figure things out that might turn humanity's like worldview on its head. And so it just like really strikes a chord with me, because this is why I got into like astronomy and what I do. So
I love that this is a woman astronomer. I think a lot of the narrative in astronomy is still dominated by male perceptions or men in the industry, and it's great to see a woman leading through example on the fact that we can all have a place to push forward in astronomy.
Yeah, we started this segment last year by calling it Nobel Notes, and we noticed the not conspicuous repetitive nature of white men coming up as the Nobel laureates. And so we decided to change that to Astro Advice, so we could include all astronomers who have good things to say about life and about astronomy, not just Nobel laureates. So thank you for noticing that, Valerie. And now all of our Astro Advice quotations will be coming from women in 2022. So you can count on a whole lot more good advice from women astronomers.
Mhm.
Any other thoughts, comments on this one? That's cool. So we've got just about 6 minutes or so before we're going to welcome our special guest. But before we do that, we're going to do Astro 365. This day in astrophysics history. It is the winter solstice, so happy solstice to everyone. Lots of cool stuff happened within a week of this date, but actually on this date, Apollo 8 was launched, which was the first manned crew to leave Earth's gravity. So talk about like pushing the boundaries of exploration and human ingenuity. That was a magnificent one for that launch. A bunch of other things that I'll mention as well. That was in 1968, by the way, on the winter solstice. In 1965, Gemini 7 actually splashed down after 15 days in space. Another milestone. Let's see what else we have here. Isaac Newton was born on December 26th. Johannes Kepler was born on the 27th. The Venera lander, Venera 7, made the first soft landing on Venus in 1970. That was on December 15th. And let's see, another interesting thing that happened in this 2-week block.
1966.
What was that?
1966. Do you see your little note there?
Oh yeah, Luna 13.
I was born then.
Oh, nice. Well, happy birthday.
Don't know much about that though. I'm just saying, I was like, oh yeah, I was born then.
Nice. Did any of those dates catch any of the co-stars' attention? Anything else you wanted to mention about any of that stuff? I didn't talk about everything that we have on these 2 weeks, but
I just love that you said it was the first soft landing on Venus, because there have been lots of not soft landings and not landings on Venus. So that's actually quite a milestone.
Yeah, so I was curious about that as well. Somebody else put this list together for me a long time ago. And I was like, what does that actually mean, a soft landing? It turns out it wasn't so soft. The landing did not go quite as planned. The parachute cord broke before it was supposed to because of the heat. But it didn't crash. It landed, bounced several times. They initially lost contact. But then when the recordings were actually downloaded, it was found that there were actually several minutes of recording taken after it landed. And so that's, I guess, what the soft landing refers to. That it
What year was that?
That was 1970.
Okay, that gives me confidence for James Webb. We're going to get it. It's going to go well. If we could do that in 1970, we can handle it with James Webb.
I think so. Yeah, and we've definitely have a lot more experience launching things from the Earth in the last 50 years since we launched Venera. So, and we don't have to really land the James Webb Space Telescope anywhere. We just got to get it out to the number 2 Lagrange point, I think it is, and get it into a nice elliptical orbit around that point, and then we're all set. But yeah, I guess the launch is the really tricky part. You gotta stick that the first time, because you don't get a second chance on that one.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts about any of these pieces of astronomical history in these couple weeks of December?
I have another question, and I don't know if you'll know the answer, but this
sure.
Apollo 8, is Apollo 8 the Earthrise photo or the Christmas Day photo? Because am I thinking of a different mission? Is that Apollo 10? Because there's a Christmas Day photo of the moon that's really famous.
That is a great question. I don't know which Apollo mission the famous picture Earthrise came from, but I think I see Frank looking it up. Ah, it is. Nice, Valerie. Thank you, Frank. Yeah, so if you're not familiar with this picture, this picture is iconic. It was one of the first pictures returned to Earth of the Earth rising over the lunar surface. So as we know, the sun, the moon don't actually rise over the horizon on Earth. We're spinning away from where we notice. And so it appears that they're rising. So the same thing happens on the moon with Earth and the sun. And so that picture was captured by Apollo 8 astronauts and has become kind of a symbolic image of seeing Earth as one interconnected whole. I think it was an image used for the very first Earth Day, and it continues to be until this day. And yeah, it really kind of puts it into perspective in terms of Earth being this isolated little speck of dust out in space that we all inhabit together, and don't have any other options to go at this point in time, although maybe we'll be on Mars in 10 years. We shall wait and see. But yeah, thank you for bringing that up, Valerie. And thank you for confirming that, Frank.
But you know, it's interesting though, Samuel, like when I took a class from Pinky Nelson, who was an astronaut in Washington State, I actually got a class and I got to go see him. And I did not know, I was like learning about right ascensions of the sun. Like I thought everything would rise. I thought the moon would do that. And didn't know that. But right ascensions of stars, and I was learning that, these calculations, these from George Nelson. Oh my gosh, couldn't believe I was there. And then I thought the moon did the same thing. The moon's a whole different sphere. But I was like, at that time in teaching, I was like, when I was teaching that astronomy class, I was like, oh, I'm not going to go there. I'm just teach constellations because it was too much. But I didn't know that, like, there's that right ascension of that noon, that time, they cross over, and then the moon was a whole different bird.
Yeah, I think lunar phases are probably the hardest thing
I wouldn't
to
even
teach in
understand that. I
astronomy.
don't understand that at all.
They are tough. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's another great there's a nice comment on YouTube. Landing is just falling with style. Indeed. Nice.
Not breaking everything all at once.
I like it.
I wonder, yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, there's actually another great kinesthetic astronomy lesson called the Moon Lesson, which I wrote, which is all about the moon phases. And,
I bet that's, I would love to read that.
My stepmom made these awesome lunar phase t-shirts for us to use for that lesson. So thank you, Wynn, for doing those. They're incredible. She cut apart white and black t-shirts and then sewed different chunks of them together to make the different lunar phases. They're awesome. Anyways, it is time for us to transition to our special guest segment. So we're going to take a short break and we will be back with Dr. Nicole Cabrera Salazar. So stick with us, enjoy the short break, and we'll see you in just a moment. Don't go away. Hello, and welcome back to the Cosmos Show. We are here with our special guest, Dr. Nicole Cabrera Salazar. Dr. Cabrera Salazar, thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, y'all.
Oh, thanks so much. Well, you are the CEO and founder of Movement Consulting, which we can't wait to hear about. We know that you also had a past life as an astrophysicist, which also very excited to hear about, and how that transition happened for you from that current life to this one. But before we dive into that stuff, I like to ask all our special guests the same question, which is, what's the one question that you wish everyone would ask you that nobody does?
Do you want a massage?
I love that. That's
That would be
great.
amazing. Like if people were just walking around offering massages all the time, I would be happier.
Oh, I love it. That's great. And that is definitely the best response we have ever received to that question. Very, very cool. Well, where are you calling in from right now?
I'm based in Atlanta, Georgia. We are a blue state now officially, so shout out to that. I grew up in Miami, but I've been in Atlanta for about 15 years. So it's like coming up on around the same amount of time that I was in Miami. So I have a tattoo actually. So I don't know if everyone can see this.
Yeah, bring it up closer to the camera. If we want
There
to.
you go.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, nice.
So it's it looks like an arrow, but it's actually two trees. So this is the top part that looks like the arrowhead is a Georgia pine.
Oh, cool.
And the bottom part is a Florida palm, like a little abstract little Florida palm tree. And so this is like, these are the two cities that I've lived in the longest time. I was born in Chile, in Santiago, but I only spent about 4 or 5 years of my life there. And I grew up in Miami, but I've been in Atlanta for so long that I'm kind of, now I say y'all all the time. I have like Southern roots now, you know?
We do that in Wyoming too. I think that's like ubiquitous in lots of places now.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about how you got into astrophysics and how that led to you eventually creating movement consulting.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I've been asked this question many times before. I think I got into astrophysics just like, I just kind of like ended up there through like a series like of, I don't know, like kind of like the universe kind of bumping me along. So it wasn't a traditional path at all. And when I was an undergrad, I did my first undergraduate internship was in Hawaii. I got to go to the University of Hawaii for a summer, and I was like, wow, like that was after my junior year in college. I did 2 years in community college in Miami, and then I transferred to Georgia Tech. And I hadn't done any research yet, and I didn't really know about any of that stuff because I'm a first generation college student, so I didn't really have any exposure to that at all. And I was doing my physics degree, and I was kind of interested in astronomy, but I didn't really know. And so I did that one internship in Hawaii, and I was like, okay, yeah, like if this can be my job, like this is my like, you know, if this is how I can spend my 40 hours a week, like let's do it. And so I ended up going to grad school to get my PhD, and I really loved science and I loved astronomy. But about 4 years into my PhD program, I was like, I had developed a physical disability. When I started writing my dissertation, I had to take 4 months of medical leave because I was having panic attacks in my sleep. I've actually met a number of women in astrophysics who've developed like autoimmune disorders as a result of like all the stress, you know, and a lot of it comes from, it can come from a very toxic, like academic workplace culture. And so after about my 4th year, I was like, I don't think I can do this anymore. And not because like I didn't love the science, but like after a while, I think your brain starts to like make those associations of like, you know, your science with like all the negative things that have happened to you. And so like, I couldn't disentangle that from my work. And so I had a lot of academic trauma, right? Which is kind of like, it's kind of a sad, you know, story. And it actually was at the point where like, I couldn't, so I mentor a lot of students in the field. I still do, a lot of students of color. And, you know, I would be at conferences, this was, you know, before COVID and everything, but I would be at conferences and they would be explaining their science to me like at their poster, and I would just start to dissociate like anytime someone would start talking about science, like and for those of y'all listening who are not aware, like dissociation is basically your brain shutting down from emotional pain, like, or emotions that are too overwhelming. So it's kind of like how if y'all have ever heard of like being in shock, like your body goes into shock, when that's like your brain shutting down physical pain, right? Like, so you don't feel any physical pain. But like dissociation is kind of like your brain like leaving your body from because of like overwhelming like sensations and feelings in your body. So I was like, okay, like, I don't think I can do this like anymore. Like, it's really affecting me. But I had 2 years left in my PhD. So I was like, it was kind of a struggle to figure out like, okay, do I want to stay? Do I want to go? And then I finally decided to stay and finish. I had a lot of pressure on me as like a Latina in science, like I didn't want to be another statistic. Like you kind of carry your whole community on your back when you're like in these spaces. And so that was one of the reasons, is that like, I was like, I feel like my whole community is like riding on this. Right. And so I wanted to finish. And I went to career counseling because I didn't know what I would do with a PhD in astronomy. Turns out, by the way, you can do a whole lot. Like you can do so much. They don't tell you, but like literally like they don't, but any company will hire you, like any company will hire you with a PhD. Of course you can't just like show up with a PhD. You have to like have their skills, and you have to be able to like translate what you do, because like, PhDs like are critical thinkers, problem solvers, right? And you can apply these skills to a variety of jobs that can be just as, if not more fulfilling than a career in research, right? And I know we talk about like alternate careers, but like I think a like conservative statistic is like 1 in every 5 astronomy PhDs. Like I think it's only like 1 or 2 in 5 will actually have like a faculty research career. And so like the alternate career is an academic career, right? And so like I got really into this when I did career counseling, because I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do. And I ended up doing the 2 years that I had left plus an extra year. And my career counselor was so wonderful. Like she gave me a lot of opportunities. One of them was a TEDx. She nominated me to be a speaker at a TEDx event at my university. And so when they asked me like, oh, like, do you want to talk about your research? I said, no, I actually want to talk about, diversity in STEM. Like that's how I kind of phrased it before. And then I was like, wow, like I really want to move into this, and I want to make sure like, that other people don't have to go through the kind of things that I went through. So I was already doing a lot of work as a graduate student. I did a lot of like workshops and stuff like that. And I created a mentoring program, and like I had a lot of initiatives going on. And so basically like all the stuff that I was doing for free, I was like, hey, I can like charge people for this, which is how most, business ideas are born. And so I started
Wyoming stargazing. Yeah.
Yeah. And so like, so I started my company. And the thing is like, it's interesting because recently, a really dear friend of mine who is one of the consultants on our team, had like, I don't know, she's like I feel like she'll say things to me sometimes, and like, she'll completely forget that she said them, but it like totally like, it just like it just like lives rent free in my head for weeks, and so they told me one time that like that the way that this company started about 4 years ago, there was this story of like victimhood, right? And I think like I have a complicated relationship to that term, as like a survivor of like abuse and all this trauma, right? Because it's like, ooh, like a lot of times people use that in a really negative connotation, right? And so I'm like, okay, I have like a complicated relationship to this word, but they were telling me like the way that this company started, like it's super, super legitimate and like, and necessary. And like the next iteration, like that same story can't propel us into like the next iteration of what like this organization is going to become, right? And so I thought about that a lot, because people always ask me like, how did you get into this? And the story is so sad and so like disempowering. And at the same time, like I think like what I've learned since I've started, and since like my team has expanded and now it's a collective, or we're trying to make this organization a collective, I feel like it's about so much more than that. Like it's kind of like, this is like the origin story, you know what I mean? Like the like villain or hero, or however you want to take a look at it, right? Origin story. But I think now it really is about It's more so about like, how do we build community? Like, how do we create a community that is supportive? Like, how do we go into a workplace and foster a culture where everybody wants to stay? Like everybody, like, not only do they want to stay, but people want to support each other. People want to be accountable to each other. People want to work with each other, and not just in a very like, you know, delineated like professional sense, but also in a way that we literally care about each other as people, and we relate to each other in a way that is that goes beyond you know, what we normally see in academia and in other workplaces.
That is so awesome. I love that. I was thinking, so thank you so much for sharing that story, first of all. I really, really appreciate you giving us all those details. At the very end there, I was thinking about something I came across not too long ago on the web. My partner shared it with me about radical human introductions. Are you familiar with that?
No.
Yeah, I wasn't either. But it's there's a, oh boy, I can't remember the name of the organization. I'll find this. But it's an organization that basically was created on the premise that people should bring their full selves into the organization, not just our professional self. And so one of the things they try to do on a daily basis is to make sure that they show up with all the different parts of themselves. And so they begin that with these radical human introductions, where people share all the different parts of who they are, where they're from, the cultures that they grew up in, their preferred gender, their sexuality, and everything else that you normally wouldn't talk about really in a professional setting. But the idea is that, like, we actually are all those things when we show up at our workplace. So why not actually bring those pieces of our identity into the workplace?
Right. Absolutely.
Consciously and deliberately.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that like, that's the thing, right? Is that like the way in which like workplaces are set up, right? And this is like part of the larger society, but then it like, you know, academia, astronomy, right? Like these are all just like microcosms of the larger society. So of course, like, they reflect like everything that we learn in the larger society, right? And so our larger society is governed by white supremacy culture, right? And there's like, what I mean by that is that like, you know, there's this idea of like whiteness being superior, right? And therefore the cultural norms of whiteness being superior and dominant and default, right? And so things like professionalism, everything that goes under the umbrella of professionalism, from the way we dress to the way we speak to punctuality, right? Like systems of time, right? That are imposed on us, right? And so what happens is that like some people can show up as their whole selves in the workplace, but it's very, very few of us, right? And so what happens is that like those of us who don't kind of fit that mold for what those workplaces were designed, it means that we have to cut away parts of ourselves, like, and I really mean that in like, we're cutting away pieces of our flesh to like, to be able to be in those spaces. And so like, what does it look like for us to transform those spaces into a place that allows for there's this the Zapatistas. I don't know, a lot of people are not familiar with the Zapatistas, so I'll just briefly explain. They're an indigenous resistance group in Mexico, out of Chiapas. And they had a revolution a few decades ago. And so they became completely independent of the Mexican government. They have their sovereign land, and they have, you know, like they're a collective society. So we actually teach a lot of folks that we work with about the Zapatistas, and about, because these are principles that I try to live by, that my team like lives by. And so one of they have hundreds of principles that they live by. And one of them is called Un Mundo Donde Quepan Muchos Mundos, which means a world where many worlds fit. And so rather than these workplaces being like a place where very, very, very few people can come in and be their whole selves, right? Because their whole selves is literally the default. It's like what we expect. It's what's accepted. It being a place where many different realities can exist at the same time. And like, how do we create a space like that, you know?
Well, I absolutely love that vision, not just for the future, but for now, right? There's no need to wait to try to do that. How do we get it done? Like what can we do in our day-to-day lives, in our professional settings to make this a reality for everybody?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think a lot of when we go into these workplaces, so we have, for instance, like we'll work with academic departments, we'll work with scientific organizations. Of late, we've been working with a lot of professional societies, right? We have to ask the question. So like a lot of people expect like, like your typical like diversity trainings, right? And so like I like to say like I don't do diversity because diversity is about like numbers, right? Ultimately, and even inclusion is about like, it's like we own the science, and then like how do we like graciously open our doors so these poor people can come and like be included in what we have, right? So we don't deal with that either, but it's like what people kind of expect, like bias training, or they're expecting like very specific iterations of like action items. They're like, they want to know what can we do, right? And honestly, for us, like the foundation that we lay is like we don't start there, right? Because if we start there, then what happened last year is what happens, right? So like after the worldwide protests after George Floyd's murder, we had a lot of people like moving into action and like kind of like deciding like, oh, we're going to write statements and we're going to put them on our websites and we're going to like do all these things. A whole bunch of companies jumped on board, right? Like Black Lives Matter became like a symbol of like, if you weren't on board with this, then you're like, then you're going against the current and stuff, right? Even though that movement is not a mainstream movement, has never been a mainstream movement, right? And so for us, it's like, okay, like there were all these like actions that happened, but if you look a year later, like where did that go, right? Like what actually ended up happening at those workplaces, and did they change for Black folks there, right? And probably not a lot. And that's because a lot of us, like, we feel like we have to go into action, but if those actions are not, if they don't have a foundation, right? If they don't have like a solid foundation to be built on, then a lot of those actions will be really hollow, and they can actually end up causing more harm. So for us, like what we do is that we come in and we teach folks like, okay, like the very first thing that we have to do is look within ourselves, right? There's this writer, speaker, activist, Locke Menon, who is a gender nonconforming, gender fluid, transgender person, who talks about how like they recently were interviewed by I think, what is it called? It's not like Man Up. It's like Justin from, what is his name? From Jane the Virgin. He's like one of the main actors on Jane the Virgin. He has this podcast. Anyway, I'll remember the name later, but anyway, he's so Locke was interviewed on there, and I think Justin asked them like, how can we help like transgender people? And Locke was saying, like, it's not about helping us, like we don't need to be helped, we are liberated, right? It's more about like, you need to figure out like, how do you get free? So that like, right, like what are the things that you need to undo in yourself, right? Because we are free, like in terms of our gender, but you are not, like you are still tied to these norms, right? And so like our liberation is bound up in each other's liberation, right? And so it's kind of similar for us, like we come in and we talk about like, what are the things that we have to unlearn within ourselves? Oftentimes I go into departments and, people are like, Doctora Nicole, like, the people who are coming to your workshop are not the people who should be there. The people who should be there are not going to show up. And I'm like, we don't have to worry about them. We don't have to worry about them, right? Because like, I'm like, I tell people all the time, if I had one person in my PhD department who had been supportive of me, I would still be doing astronomy, right? So rather than focus on the things that are external and like the actions, like we ask every single person to like look internally at themselves, right? Because we all are complicit in these behaviors and these norms, right? We all buy into it, right? We all drink the Kool-Aid, right? Like at some level, like the higher we go in academia, the more we have to give up of our values, the more that we have to look the other way when other people are being abused and when other people are being disenfranchised, right? And so like we are all complicit, all of us, including myself, right? And so what we ask people is like, okay, like let's dig deep and let's look into ourselves, right? A lot of folks are like a little surprised at first when they start working with us, because we're like, you know, they don't expect it to be that intense, like emotionally, right? Because we literally have to ask people to take a look at their own behaviors, their own actions, their own beliefs, because that's where it starts, right? And that internal emotional work is so important and so foundational, even and especially with folks who think they have it together, who think that, you know, that they have, they're socially conscious or whatever. Because even for myself, like I fall into these traps all the time. So I feel like the first step is really like taking a look within ourselves and starting to process like the things that we believe, the things, the behaviors that we're engaging in, the things that we're doing that are perpetuating these systems of oppression within our workspaces.
Well said. I've been talking a lot. I would love to hear from any of the co-stars. If you have any questions or comments, please go for it.
Okay, I would like to say, Nicole, I think you're my prima. I just feel you, but you're talking about epistemology, how we come to know, right? How we come to know, like, how did we get there? Like when you're talking about the workspace, and I was going to talk about something else, but you're actually getting those people like, how did you get there? How can we, like I'm here, but don't you think that's it? Going back to say, how did you get to where you are for the people that you're working with?
I mean, in terms of like unpacking
Yeah, and
white
that's
privilege.
what it is that's what the word is. And I'm just saying like, so how did you get here? So then you just kind of go kind of the other way.
Can you say more? I don't know if I understand your question.
Okay, so like, so the people that you're working with, you're like, okay, we're here. Well, and let me just tell you a little bit about my background. So I'm a Hispanic gal that went to an all-white school. And then when I went to catechism, all the Hispanic people, it was like a racism with racism. It was like they didn't like me and didn't like my family. And I had to work through that. And it was like the hardest thing. I mean, then I became an adult, whatever, but you're just like going through life going, here I am and trying to do this. And I get here. And you're talking about people like, how do people, they get to be somewhere and they treat people in a certain way, even though I grew up Valdez, Hispanic, but went to the white school. And then I go to this catechism and it's all like, we're getting beaten down. And I'm trying to go up, get my PhD. When I get my PhD, it's like, oh, everyone else is like, oh, you're on this island. And I had the hard time that you did. No one accepted that. I was losing my hair. I didn't know, my parents didn't teach me how to get a PhD. I had to learn how to learn. I had to learn how to study. I watched people that would study in a library and learned on my own. But what I'm saying is, and my question is, I don't know, I went way over there, but I'm just saying, you were doing your PhD, having a hard time doing that, but epistemology is like, how do you tell people, like, if you learned a certain way in your little life, that's how you know to become as an adult, how you treat people.
Of course. Absolutely. Absolutely.
No matter what you're doing, your PhD or your little kid, that epistemology, it comes in how you know. And then how do you break that down for people that you're trying to make your path and then you get shot down along the way?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think if I heard you correctly, it's like, it sounds like what you're saying is like, we all like have these experiences and then we like get to a certain point and then like, I'm showing up at a point in their journey where they have to like start to unpack these things, right? And so
I think Sam said, yeah.
Yeah. So like, so first of all, when we facilitate these spaces, we try to do it from a place of like non-judgment, right? So we're observing what's here. And even, for example, like we ask folks, so we have this mentoring program it's a mentoring course for faculty who want to be in right relation with the people that they mentor, right? We have a little slide up here. It's called Intent to Impact Eye to Eye. That's like the mentoring course that we have. And one of the things that we ask is like, it's a very hard question. It's how, what values did you have to compromise on to get to where you are? Because you're a faculty member, right? So what values did you have to compromise on to get to where you are? And how many people did you have to watch, be abused by the system
or affect?
In this, and also then we also ask folks like, what when you look back, what are some of the things that you had to perpetuate yourself in order to get to this? Because like ultimately, like we're being asked to buy into the system that is abusive to everyone, but it's particularly abusive to marginalized people, the more marginalized identities that you have, right? And we are not completely conscious of this. Sometimes we are, sometimes we aren't. And so I'm meeting folks at a point in their journey, and folks are at all different points, right, in their journey. And so what we tell them is like, when we have them engage with this question, we ask them, okay, like we're going to engage with this question not from a place of judgment or self-judgment or guilt, because those feelings can make us freeze and not and kind of spiral in this like kind of like a guilt spiral, and we can't move forward, right? So like it's a natural human response, and it's a response that we don't want to stay stuck in, right? And so we try to say like, let's observe what's here, like without any judgment. It's like what we're going to do is we're going to observe it, acknowledge it, and we're going to hold space for these things, right? So for example, this mentoring course that I was talking about, it's 6 live sessions over 12 weeks. And these live sessions are like, it's a group setting. So it's almost, I think of it as like group therapy, because we have to witness each other, like come to the realization and recognize that the system has also abused us, right? And you can be the person with like the most privilege and the most power, right, in that room, but that system is still asking you to do something, right, that is inhumane, right? That is treating you as, it's dehumanizing in a lot of ways, right? I'm talking about the system of academia, right? And so we are witnessing each other come to these realizations and unpack these things, because ultimately, like, it's like that saying, like they pass around in therapy, it's like hurt people hurt people. I've been in therapy for like almost 10 years. It'll be 10 years in February, right? And so it's like, like we know that people who have experienced trauma are more likely to perpetuate trauma unless they are aware of it and intercede, right, on themselves, right? And so like we know that this abuse is it's perpetuating because people are not aware of these things. And so we have to come in and do the very difficult emotional work of excavating these things, examining them, and committing to something different. Because what the system is telling us, right, and this is something that we learned from Aristide, who was the first democratically elected president of Haiti. He talks about this in his book, Eyes of the Heart. He talks about the third way. So he mentions that, in poor countries, they're given the option of either opt into globalization and die of exploitation, or resist globalization and die of starvation, right? And he says that this is a choice between death and death. So we're often given choices like this in these systems, not just academia, by the way, of course, like other industries, and you see this in every industry, and other industries have it much, much worse, right? But in academia, we see this as well, right? And we're giving these two options. It's like, well, you either work 70 hours a week, or you will not get a tenure track position, or you will not get tenure, or you won't get a postdoc, or you won't get into grad school, or et cetera, right? And so like, what we try to do in our work is we're trying to say there's a third way, right? There's a way that is not being presented here, but that we can create, right? That we can change, that we can like foster, that we can cultivate, right? And so that's what we have to do. But the first step is that we have to look internally at ourselves, and we have to see the trauma that has been inflicted upon ourselves, right? And acknowledge that, which is a big thing, right? Because academic trauma is still trauma. Like I had to do, like, y'all, I've done individual therapy, group therapy, couples counseling. I've done intense like trauma therapy. I've done this kind of therapy called EMDR.
Yeah, I've
Which
definitely done that.
okay, there you go. All right, EMDR in the house. All right, listen, it's intense. It's intense. It's you know, it's not for the faint of heart. Like I started EMDR when I was like 7 years into therapy, and it's like it was a very, very intense process. And it's one of the only known treatments for PTSD, which I have complex PTSD from childhood trauma. And so like one of the targets that I worked on in EMDR, which is like this intense trauma therapy, is from grad school. So like, you know, I had to process experiences from graduate school in like intense, deep trauma therapy, right? And so like this shit is real. And so like, and it harms all of us, right? But the more marginalized identities we have, the more harm we experience. And we're kind of like the canaries in the coal mine, right? So like Black folks, for instance, right, have been decrying these things for many years, right? And I often tell people, you know, like, you know, you know, it's more palatable coming from me because I'm a white Latina, right? Definitely more palatable coming from me than it is coming from a Black woman, right? And so, you know, all of these things, like, they have to be brought out into the light. They have to be examined, and they have to be dealt with, right? And in a space that is non-judgmental, that is a space where growth is encouraged. And this is not what we see in academia, right? When I was a grad student, I was not allowed to make mistakes. I don't know about y'all, but I was not allowed to make mistakes. And even though that was the time to make mistakes because the stakes were much lower, right? And so we have to have these spaces that are nurturing and nourishing, right? Like, because, and that's the thing, like we have to model that, like as a company, right? Like I come in with my organization, my team, and we have to model that because folks literally have never seen another way of being that isn't like high scrutinization. You know, if you mess up publicly, it's like you can get ripped to shreds, you know, and we have to model that something different is possible.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, I can just speak from my own personal experience leading an organization that I have definitely like failed in doing that a lot, and learned a lot from those failures. And you can ask Frank about this offline. She can tell you if I'm getting better at it or not. But I think I definitely am. But it's tough, and it required me, like exactly like you're saying, to do a lot of personal work. And it was, you know, stuff that that was not pleasant a lot of the time, but really needed to be done. And you know, and even now I still like I get pushback, not from my staff, but actually from my board of directors when I include lots of personal information in like annual reviews. Right. They want me to keep it like, you know, just professional. Like, did I meet the budget? You know, what were all my, you know, professional goals for the organization? Did I meet those? And when I spend like half my review talking about how I've grown as a person, they find it odd.
Right.
And exactly. So it's like I'm trying to establish that new norm with them, but it's scary for them. I think I don't think they are used to being that real in a nonprofit setting, and so it's challenging for them to see something different.
Absolutely. And honestly, I'm glad that you brought up the fact that like you mess up, because like honestly, like we all do, right? And I think that one of the tenets of white supremacy culture is like perfectionism, right? Like we have to show up perfectly, right? But that means the reason that white supremacy culture is so dehumanizing is that like, you know, we aren't allowed to show up as humans, right? And so one thing that we teach, you know, folks that we engage with is like a method called we call it risk, reflect, repair. So this is something that I learned in couples counseling, which honestly I feel like should just be like, because it's helped me in like so many different relationships, but it's very like normalized that this only exists within like romantic partnerships and usually heteronormative partnerships, right? And it's so, but what I learned there is that like we will hurt each other. Like, that's the point. The point is that we will hurt each other. The point isn't to like avoid hurting each other. The point is like, how will we repair? How will we repair? Right? So then we say like risk, reflect, repair. If we try not to hurt others, then what we risk is that like then we do nothing, right? But any kind of move in a that's going to change the direction of like where we are right now is going to involve risk. So we have to risk hurting other people, which feels counterintuitive because we're like, we don't want to hurt other people, right? The thing is like, if we deny it, then all we're doing is causing harm without there being an avenue to talk about it, right? So we risk hurting other people. When we inevitably hurt other people, we reflect based on what people have told us. We create an environment in which we can be taken aside and called in, called out, however you want to call it, where we can be told like, ouch, you said XYZ thing, or you did this harmful thing. We reflect on those things, and then we come back and we repair after we reflected, right? And so like, how do we create this environment in which that is normalized, right? Because we will hurt other people. I tell students all the time, I mentor a lot of students, and I tell them all the time, like, very first conversation is I'm gonna fuck up, and I'm gonna do it like pretty soon, and probably in ways that you didn't expect. But I need you to know that I will be doing everything that I can to so that this relationship is one in which you feel safe calling me out, right? Because when I fuck up, it's because I am not aware of my behavior or what I'm doing. And I want to make sure that you feel like you can tell me these things. But that is my job as a person with more power, right? So it's about understanding. This is another thing that we teach folks all the time, is about power dynamics, understanding the power dynamics in the room, understanding the power that we hold, right? And as someone who leads a company like that's doing this type of work within my own team, like, I have been called out because, I want to believe that my company is different, that we're a collective, that we don't have a vertical hierarchy. But at the end of the day, and this is something that we're contending and grappling with right now, like, when shit hits the fan, we are a hierarchy, right? I make decisions when things get very stressful and there's a deadline, like, I make the decisions, right? As like the CEO, right? Even though like on paper, we want to say like we're a collective, right? And so recently one of my colleagues was like, this is in direct contradiction to what we say and what we teach people, right? And so now we're taking steps to correct this. But this is an environment in which that person, that colleague, felt comfortable bringing this not just to me, but to the team, right? And now as a team, we can correct these things, because I'm like, I don't want it to be a hierarchy, but that's where I am right now. And like, I don't know how to get there, right? And so now we're working together to try to get to that point. But of course, like, we will hurt people, we will fuck up. Like, that is absolutely something that, like, the sooner that we can accept that, the closer we will be to being able to like to changing things. Because like, as long as we're holding on to this idea of that we can show up perfectly, that's going to be a deterrent to us like being able to change things.
It's funny you say that. I was watching that cheesy California Christmas movie on Netflix right before we sat down to record. And at one point they say to each other, like, I'll forgive you 1,000 times or something like that. And my husband looked at me and he said, would you forgive me? I think it's like 1,000,000. He's like, would you forgive me 1,000,000 times? And I said, yes. And he kind of right off of that, he was like, really? And I was like, yeah. And you'll probably have to forgive me 1,000,000 times. But that's what a marriage is going to be. That's what our relationships are. I really like that you obviously your focus is in academia and professional environments, but it is true that the lessons that you have taken from your own experiences and are working with your team to help other companies and individuals realize are applicable far beyond the boundaries of an office or an academic institution.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think honestly, like, this is like, these are things that we also like Indigenous people teach us about being in right relation to each other, right? And these are lessons that like Indigenous people have known for like millennia, right? That like, shout out to them, right? Because it's not just like the foundations of like psychotherapy and like all this stuff like is like a Western practice, is something that like many traditions have already known for a long time, but this is like the practice of being in right relation. How do we be in relation to each other? How do we practice relationship dynamics that that are nourishing, that are compassionate, that are empathetic, that take into account the collective experience and not just an individual's experience? All of these things are all teachings that we bring to the table that I feel like have to be credited to like Indigenous knowledge.
I've got a question for you, Nicole. So I started a company about a year ago, a little over a year ago. And one of the things that has been, it's a medical technology, like device development company. And one of the things that I've been trying to really prioritize is to make sure that it is as safe a place as possible for folks from all walks of life, all backgrounds, and that that's something that is prioritized, and I'm just curious what advice, and I know we're probably running a little short on time here, but for a company that's just starting out or that's just formed, how would you recommend best approaching that to ensure that the environment is as inclusive and as positive as possible?
I would say, give me a call.
Nice.
No, but seriously, so we work with academics all the time, and we work with organizations, but something that is a model in academia that I see time and time again is that like when people want to get something done with respect to what they call like DEIA initiatives, so like diversity, equity, and inclusion, they'll form a committee or a working group, and usually it's like a group of non-experts, right? Like it's all scientists or they're all academics, and they're just kind of like trying to do the best they can, but their expertise is in something totally different, right? And so, for instance, like for me as a company, like when I have, like for instance, like I have a science background, and I do this work, and this is work that I've been doing for years, right? But I don't have like I don't have any idea how to do bookkeeping, so I had to hire an accountant, right? I had to bring somebody in who was an expert in doing these things to help me with that, because like I could have sat down and like learned all the things about accounting and stuff like that, but and you know this because you have your own business, right? After a while, it just doesn't make sense anymore, because like your job as like the CEO is to have like to do a very specific job, right? And so I would say that like and this goes for like any kind of organization, like if you're trying to make sure that things are equitable, like you need to bring someone in who knows what they're doing, who knows how to deal with that, because like I think like otherwise then your job is to read the sociology, read literature, and like know the best practices, and like be completely immersed in that understanding and then apply it to your company. You know what I mean? So I'm not trying to be facetious. Like I really think that like people and academia, an issue that I have, or it's more of a challenge really, is that like I have to teach academics. So academics, like we're used to doing things on a volunteer model, which is it can be very toxic, because ultimately the people who end up doing the work are the very people who are most negatively affected by the environment. And so not only are they having to fight all these things in the environment and try to do their science, and now they're also supposed to fix the problems that they didn't bring to the table, you know what I mean? And so like then what ends up happening is that like those people are super saturated, and then like the thing it just continues right as it is. And so I have to teach academics like, hey, like I'm a consultant, here's what it's like to work with a consultant, here's like what you should expect, and here's how it works, here's how you find funding, right? Because like they're not used to it, they're used to people doing things for free, and I have to tell them sometimes, I'm like, you can do that like all day long and you're not going to see any results, right? Or you might see results very slowly over a very long period of time, and during that time more people are experiencing harm, right? And so like if you want to like experience like the kind of results and the kind of like quality of work that we can provide as like experts, then that's something that like you have to engage with, right? But people are not used to that. They're not used to that. So like I have to do the job of like educating them on like how to work with that, right? And so I really encourage like, and I try to tell people all the time, it's like, you know, we're experts in our science, right? And so like if we want to write a paper on a detection like method, right? We're not going to turn to someone who is maybe like a theorist in a totally different field, right? And expect that to go well or quickly, right? And so like we need to start maybe thinking about it that way, and like bringing in someone who knows what they're doing, so that like you can get as close to the results that you want as possible, in a much shorter time span, so that we're not just waiting decades and decades for like that change to happen. And I would say, Danielle, like, thank you for your question. Being a year in to your company, like I am almost 4 years into my company, and every single time that you grow, like there's like a potential to like when you're well, the thing is, like when you're small, this is what I'm just telling you this because it's so top of mind for me right now, because my team is like really holding me accountable for this in particular, is that like when you're small, like these things, like they have the potential to affect like a much smaller group of people, and it's easier to change. It's easier to change when you're small. The more you grow, the harder it is to, because you have established procedures, established practices, established culture, environment, right? And so like the sooner you can intervene, the better, right? Because like then later on it just becomes so much harder, because like I've worked with companies that, like tech companies especially, that are like a little bit farther along. And let me tell you something, it's very, very hard to change those workplace cultures, because there's already people at the top, middle management, like going all the way down, where these cultural norms are so embedded that for them it is almost like easier to start from scratch than it is to like make changes to what they already have going on. You know what I mean?
Right.
So yeah.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah.
I thought of a great barometer for the future I want to live in that you're creating or helping create. So I just tell a really quick short story. So do any of you watch NCIS, or anyone at home? Everyone's seen NCIS.
Know what
it's
it
like
is,
always on TV, right? And there's Abby, the scientist, who's like very unconventional. And what I hope we can work toward with the work that you're doing is the Abby, the scientist or academic, who is not just unconventionally dressed, but also non-gender binary and a person of color. And I don't think, oh, she wouldn't be working for the government, or she wouldn't be working in science because she dresses a certain way or looks a certain way. Like that's my new way of challenging my own thinking from having you as a guest, is I assume she can't have that job because she dresses differently. I can't imagine what it's like when it's not even the way you dress, because maybe you try and conform in your attire and you show up on time and you behave a certain way, and it's still not conforming enough. Right. And we lose so many great scientists and academics because of that system. Yeah. And that's a loss to all of us for perpetuating that.
Yeah. And poets and artists and musicians and on and on and on and on. I love that as a barometer, Valerie. And I don't mean to like downplay that at all or anything that we're talking about, but that is exactly why I love Gene Roddenberry's formulation of Star Trek. And I'm talking about the original one, where at the time where white supremacy was just as pronounced as it is today, if not more so, probably, he created a multi-ethnic crew and a multi-gendered crew on his starship, envisioning what a future could look like, right? And it got a lot of backlash. Like, you can't have women on the bridge or people of color on a bridge. Like, that doesn't happen. But like, he obviously, was forward thinking and saw that as what the future was going to hold and what it should hold. And I've always loved that about Star Trek, is that it is a social commentary and gets at, I think, a lot of the roots of racism, oppression, and how that is so ubiquitous in our society. So yeah, I think seeing, things, 40 years ago for people that they thought were shocking, and now they're like, of course they can be on the bridge, right? In the same way that, the character you just described should be like, of course they can work for the government and look like that. That should be the norm in very short order.
Yeah.
If not today.
I wasn't sure how much time we have left.
Yeah, we're way over time.
My bad. Well, I just wanted to call quick attention to these. So my team made this little slide that's here, but I just wanted to to say a little bit about them, because they, like, out of context, they might like look kind of weird, like just says money anxiety and then like a little bit link. So one of the things that we've started doing recently, because the way that we have normally engaged with scientists and with departments is like, you know, a department will hire us and then like we'll come in and do some trainings and some curriculum. And if you're a student, like, and you want to engage with our content, the only way that you really have to do that is if your department happens to hire us, and then you get to be part of that. And so one of the things that we wanted to do to make our content like more accessible to folks is we started doing webinars. They're $30 per person. We do them now about once a month. And we've done a couple now. And the next one is in January. And it's a webinar on money anxiety. And it's going to be co-hosted by two of the people on our team. Namely Bea Khan and Ines Rodriguez. And this webinar, I just wanted to give a little bit more context, because it just like says money anxiety there. But it's basically about how a lot of students, especially first generation students, feel a lot of financial stress, like in the workplace. And of course, like the more marginalized identities you have, the more likely you are to feel that financial stress. And so this is a webinar that's going to be about kind of like recognizing like where those anxieties around money come from, also developing strategies to deal with financial stress, and reframe what resources mean to you. And so that is a webinar that we're going to have in January. And there's a bit link here, bit.ly/M_A_REG. And so if folks want to register for that, they can. You don't have to be a student. You can be anybody with money anxiety. And then the other thing that's on the slide is Intent to Impact, which is our faculty mentoring course. This is a course that I described earlier. It's 6 live sessions over 12 weeks, starting January 28th. And it's Friday afternoons. I believe it's like, I want to say it's like 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern time, but we have a link to register. It's bit.ly/I_REG to register. This is a course that is really, it's like our kind of like deepest diving sort of engagement. And we love it because it's a small group of people. I think the cap is like 15 people. And so we have this sort of deep dive into like, what does it mean to be a mentor, especially to people with marginalized identities. And we have people, you know, sort of like unpack like what they're bringing to the table, like their beliefs, and we kind of expose also the academic values that they've ingested and like kind of internalized, as well as then also once we do that, then how do we create a space between ourselves and the mentee that allows for growth, that allows the mentee to feel that this is a joyful experience, a joyful path, right? So like, you know, I certainly didn't have that when I was in graduate school. And a lot of times it can be something that's fraught with like anxiety and like disempowerment. And what we want to do is create a space where the mentee feels really empowered, really like they feel like they are in charge of their own career, that they are making decisions that are in alignment with their values, where they feel like graduate school is a place for them to grow and learn and like be curious and excited, and it isn't something that is like detrimental to their health or to their mental well-being, right? And so like this is the space where we get to learn all of that in a judgment-free zone, with other folks who are like-minded in the sense that they also want to work on these things and they want to get there. And so that is our Intent to Impact course. And then we also have on the right bottom part of this slide, we are on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. We are mostly on Instagram right now. It's our sort of like educational platform. We have, we're on a little holiday break right now, but generally we have Instagram lives every Wednesday. This might change in the new year, but basically we have like weekly lives where we cover during the week, we create posts about things that affect marginalized people in STEM, but of course, like people more broadly can learn from it. So for instance, we've done topics such as toxic monogamy culture. We've covered, imposter phenomenon. We've covered like non-academic careers, things like that. And then we have like an Instagram live where we discuss these things like with a co-host. And so that is like a very, very supportive space, especially for students, but we are becoming more active on Twitter now as well. And all of our handles for all of our social media is at Move Boldly, so MOVEBOLDLY. And so we're hoping that y'all can connect with us because we have our little communities here, and we want to continue to connect with y'all.
We definitely will. Those trainings actually sound perfect for the direction that Wyoming Stargazing is headed, at least for me personally, and hopefully for some of our staff as well. As I said before, we are way over time, but before we close, I want to give Frank an opportunity to join the conversation. No pressure, Frank. You can stay muted if you want, but you are just about to go into an astrophysics program, and I'm so curious how you're feeling about that with this conversation that's just unfolded right now, and what support we might be able to offer you, what support you're hoping to find as an astrophysics student, and just what's on your mind.
There's a running joke in my college friend group about how academia is like soul sucking, and who would want to go into and like who would want to continue being in academia. And there's only a few of us, and so that is relevant. And then also I had a friend this summer who was talking about how she didn't want to be a researcher or a professor because of how little work-life balance they seem to possess, and how much they had to sacrifice to get to that position. Not even like like a tenured track professor, but just a professor at a college.
Right.
And so I know as I start looking at graduate school, I'm really thankful that I have had this gap year, because I think it has allowed me to have some like rejuvenation period. But I'm also just worried, just generally, about maintaining a personhood and being able to support other people's personhood in that sort of community. So just like thinking about that, and also just I'm really interested in trying to find avenues, like I said, to support other people's personhood. Like you're saying, the toll it takes is greater for people with different identities, and so just trying to support that with who I am. So just thinking about those sorts of things as it rolls around is what's on my mind currently.
Yeah, that's so real. Oh my God. It reminds me of this tweet that I saw the other day that y'all probably saw because it went viral, but it was like, it said something like, y'all want me to get a PhD? The thing that made y'all all depressed, like, right? And so it's like super relatable content over here. But yeah, I want to encourage you, Frank, because I feel like definitely the gap year will give you a lot of perspective. I think it's really great that you were able to do that, because not everyone is. And I do want to say that, like, going into this new era of like movement, my organization, and like kind of like focusing on like the community that we can have, right? Rather than like on the things that like we can't do, or like focusing on the things that are going wrong. Not to say like, I mean, yes, there's shit that's going wrong, and we definitely need to like work on that. And I also want to say that at the same time, like one thing that I always tell students is organize, because you have collective power way more so than you have individual power, right? And so if you want to be supportive of others, like, and you want to find support, the best way to do that is in community, right? So like as an individual grad student, you might not be able to negotiate a work-life balance that feels good to you and that feels true to your values. But as a collective, all of the grad students in that, wherever you are, wherever you will see yourself, can organize for that, right? And can leverage their power, their collective power that way. And so I did this when I was a graduate student. I started a mentoring program, and we realized that like the first year graduate students were complaining about work hours. I was like, like I had it tough, but I'm like, nothing like what they're describing. So what we did is that we sent out an anonymous survey, and we asked a lot of questions about like how grad students were spending their time, in the lab, teaching, doing research, whether they were working at home or whether in the office, and it was like we got a very rich data set, and we were able to present it at the faculty meeting and say like, this is how much students are working. We've asked them to lay it out, and like, this is how they feel. Here's like anonymous responses. And we were able to change policy based on those data. Also, we have to understand that like these people who are in power, it's I find it very difficult to understand. And sometimes like, because people who are in power benefit from these systems, right? They would be remiss to like, they're not gonna be the ones who wanna tear it down, right? And so sometimes what we do is like, as a collective, we might say like, we might not get support from the system itself. So we have to provide support for each other. So for instance, one of the things that we did as a collective is we organized to create a library of textbooks for graduate school. So we asked like more senior graduate students to donate their textbooks, and like we created a little library and in the grad student office, so that everyone would have access to textbooks even if they couldn't afford them, because even with that stipend, like it wasn't possible for a lot of us, right? And so like these are ways that we can give each other what we need. And I think about the word that comes to mind is mutual aid, right? So for instance, when the pandemic was happening, like in my community in Atlanta, there are lots of undocumented folks, and they kind of organize themselves like, okay, like a lot of undocumented people don't have driver's licenses, and so it was like within the community, they were like, okay, like let's look at who in this community, for example, is at higher risk of contracting COVID, maybe more senior folks, and like they might want to go to the grocery store earlier. So like, how can we organize within the community, like people who have driver's licenses can go and like and drive those folks to the store, or like can pick up groceries, and like we can share resources. Like there's so many ways to organize amongst ourselves as a collective that I think that you have access to, right? That is, and this is something that I learned from, and that we teach also in our trainings. This is something that I learned from the Mi Gente organization, which is the Latinx political organization, national organization. They have chapters in different cities. And what they teach is within, without, and against. So there are things that, like, for instance, like in order to create change, there are ways to work within the system, without the system, and against the system. So for instance, like if you're working within the system, might look like I'm going to get elected to my local government, right? Because I want to change it from the inside. I want to make laws and policies that change things, right? Working without is saying like, I'm going to start a nonprofit organization because these hoes are not going to give me what I need. So I'm going to go and do my own thing, right? That is without the government. And then against is all the people who are saying, okay, like we have these elected officials, right? How are we going to put pressure on them to make sure that they stick to their campaign promises, right? Or that to make sure that they are supporting the communities that they are charged with supporting, right? And you need all three. You need all three. Right? You need the within, without, and against, right? And so I encourage you to think about this in terms of like, whatever graduate program you end up in, like there are ways to do all of these things, right? There are ways to do it within the system, without the system, and against. And so how will y'all leverage your collective power to make absolutely sure that you get the things that you need? Yeah.
That's all super helpful, and I will I was like taking notes on my notes app. So I'll keep that all in mind. Thank you, I really appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and keep us posted, Frank. We'd love to support you along the way as well. Well, we are way over time. It's pretty typical for the Cosmos Show. I could keep talking about this for a long time. Dr. Nicole Cabrera Salazar, thank you so much for being with us tonight. It has been such a pleasure to talk with you. And I actually want to keep talking with you later on about our advisory board for our scholarship program that we're creating for underrepresented people in STEM fields. And I want to thank all the co-stars for being here, our brand new co-stars and returning co-stars, our stream master behind the scenes folks, Maggie and Gavin, board of directors who helped to make the Cosmos Show possible, and all of you out there who are watching the Cosmos Show. Thanks so much for tuning in. Join us again in the new year for an awesome lineup of special guests. And don't forget about the James Webb Space Telescope launch that's happening on Christmas Eve. We've got information about it on the Wyoming Stargazing website. On the 30th, if you're in Jackson, we got a launch party at the Wyoming Stargazing office, and stargazing afterwards. Should be a lot of fun. Thank you all for being here. We'll see you next time. And in the meantime, don't forget to look up. We'll see you then.